Okay.
Michael, after you leave, after you speak, the minister will take your seat, okay?
Okay.
Get it on. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Put your headphones on, please. We're waiting on one more speaker, but we're going to switch in and out as people are going to be... Put on? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. No? Can't hear me? You can hear me. Guido can't hear me. Welcome to our second panel discussion on a dialogue for climate action, farmers' voices in the fight for climate change. We're waiting on one more speaker. He's going to come and we're going to switch in and out because our keynote is going to have to leave us. We're going to start with opening remarks by the Director General of ICA, Dr. Manuel Otero, followed by a keynote address by Dr. Michael Kremer. We're honored to have a Nobel Prize laureate with us. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. Then he will be followed by Ms. Luisa Volpe from the World Farmers Organization, a good friend and partner of ICA. We're delighted to have you, Luisa. Then Ms. Imelda Bukundo Dada, who comes to us from all the way from Indonesia. Thank you for coming to us. She is a climate finance and engagement specialist with the FAO in Rome via Bali in Indonesia. We have Minister Abelardo Mai, who you heard in the last panel, the Minister of Agriculture and Food Security and Enterprise in Belize. And then we're going to have a case study by Caitlin Carew, who's the Executive Director of Helen's Daughter, and she's from St. Lucia. So with that, Dr. Otero, the floor is yours. You can sit.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to give a warm welcome to the Minister of Agrarian Development of Brazil, Minister Paulo Teixeira. Let me shake your hand. Obrigado, Ministro. É prazer, uma honra tê-lo aqui. Vou dar... Welcome once again to the home of sustainable agriculture of the Americas. The motto for this year is transforming the agri-food systems for a healthy planet and healthy people. You will see a very, very high-level panel. I would like to highlight the presence of our friend, Dr. Michael Kremer, Nobel Prize winner 2019, I think. And he's also Goodwill Ambassador of ICA. As a matter of fact, Caitlin Carew is also a Goodwill Ambassador of ICA. And Dr. Ratan Lal, the most important scientist in soil in the world, also Goodwill Ambassador. Our colleague of FAO, colleague of World Farmer Organization, and the friend of ICA and Minister of Belize. He's doing a fantastic job trying to cope with a lot of problems affecting the agriculture sector in Belize. I love the title of this event, Farmer Voices, because the title fits perfectly with the three premises we have in ICA. The first premise, farmers at the forefront of all negotiations. They are the protagonists of the transformation of food systems. And I wonder how many farmers are attending the COP29. I don't know, but I imagine it is a low percentage. 3 farmers, 4, 5, okay. I feel more tranquil. The second premise is science and innovation as a main input for agriculture policies. And once again, how much money are we investing? Probably Dr. Kremer will have an answer about it. And last but not least, we need agriculture as a critical part of the solution. In the previous panel, Dr. Isabela Teixeira emphasized that the climate crisis is a political problem that need agriculture be involved, obviously defining the new limits for agriculture and ratifying the responsibility for food security, for energy security, in a new alliance with nature, obviously, and occupying also a crucial role for peace, agriculture as an instrument for peace. So as a Director General of AICA, I am very proud to have such a high-level panel, and I would like right now to give the floor to my friend and Deputy Director General. He's behaving very well, occupying that role. Please, Lloyd, your turn.
Thank you. Minister, if you'd like to sit there, take this microphone. So we're going to begin the panel with a keynote presentation by our Nobel Prize winner for economics and the ICA Ambassador of Goodwill, Dr. Michael Kremer. He'll speak from 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will, I know you have to go on, and so then we'll ask questions of the panelists and then we'll continue. So Dr. Kremer, the floor is yours.
Great. I'm going to take this off. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I've now been working with ICA for several years, and it's been a pleasure to talk about the potential of innovation to support farmers with Dr. Otero and also to interact with Jorge Wertheim, who's not able to be here today. I'm here in a couple of different roles. One, I lead a lab at the University of Chicago, which works to collaborate with policymakers to help identify and rigorously test potential innovations in development to help inform policy. And as part of that role, I've been chairing a commission on innovation for climate change, food security, and agriculture. And the commission includes former heads of state and finance ministers, and let me mention a couple of people from the region. Former President of Mexico, Ernesto Zedillo, and the former finance minister of Colombia, Mauricio Cardenas. And what the commission has been doing, and the secretariat has been doing of the commission, has been trying to review the evidence on a number of ways that farmers of new technologies, new innovations, innovations thought of broadly, not just new seeds, but also new ICT technologies, new social innovations. What is the evidence on how they affect the lives of farmers and their ability to adapt to climate change, and also to help mitigate climate change? As we've reviewed these, we've isolated a few that have rigorous evidence of impact and cost effectiveness, not just for the innovations themselves, like the new seeds, but also for ways to increase adoption of these. Because it's one thing to have these innovations in the laboratory. It's another thing that doesn't do any good, really. It only helps if farmers actually use them. So we want things that farmers have shown willingness to use. So we have a number of recommendations based on our analysis. I'm going to talk today about one of them. You can perhaps think of it as encompassing a few sub-elements, which is digital agriculture. I think digital agriculture is exciting because it creates the potential for a very low-cost and customizable way to provide timely agricultural advice to farmers, as well as a suite of other services. Given the theme today, let me know that this shouldn't be thought of as a one-way communication from agricultural experts to farmers, but also a tool for farmers to provide information to each other, to link farmers to the value chains, to link farmers to the research community and to so the research community knows what problems farmers are facing so they can direct their attention to those problems. So, I think this is an area that is, in a way, the practice is ahead of the research. So I'm going to be talking some about some of the research. Some of this will be on things that have already been around for a few years, but there's really potential to do more and more, particularly with the development of artificial intelligence and large language models. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's happened with very simple, very basic digital tools, and argue that even there, the gains are very impressive. But we'll be able to do much more with large language models. Okay. And then after talking about some examples of success, I'd like to talk about how you can adopt them. With new innovations, they don't start out working ideally straight out of the box. You need to go through a process of continuous improvement and trying different variants over time. And that's what technology companies are doing with A/B tests. They'll try one version of a software or another, and they're constantly changing this so they can maximize their profits. Well, if this is important enough for Amazon or Google to earn more money, it's also something that can be used to better provide information to farmers and better interact with farmers. Okay, so let me give a few examples. I'll start with an example from pest management, but then I'll also talk about soil chemistry, weather, and obviously this can be applied to new seeds and new agricultural techniques and inputs, all of which will have to evolve with climate change. So one question is whether farmers will react to digital messages. There are many challenges facing farmers. There's financial constraints, there's availability of different inputs. So it might not, I think it's in principle an open question whether digital communication can affect them. But we're now seeing quite a bit of evidence, even with these basic messages. So in Ecuador, sending text messages summarizing integrated pest management practices substantially increased the adoption of those practices by 7 percentage points among potato farmers. Was involved in studies in East Africa. Again, very simple SMS messages. Farmers were 22% more likely to adopt agricultural lime to treat acidic soil and more likely to use appropriate quantities of fertilizer. Now, these benefits might seem modest, and in absolute magnitude, I don't want to exaggerate them. These are, we're committed to telling you get a lot of hype about a lot of things. I'm not going to argue that these are by themselves going to revolutionize agriculture. You'll need a comprehensive suite of innovations. But I think what's remarkable about digital agriculture is the benefit-cost ratio. So I'm an economist. We were just talking before about budgets being very tight in the region. Well, this is something that with a very small amount of investment to send text messages and to refine those messages or to use apps or other things with more sophisticated programs, it's possible to get a very high return. So we estimated, for example, that in our study that the benefits exceed the cost of adding one more farmer. The benefits of that exceed the cost 46-fold. So 46 times as high returns as the cost. Now, this is something that's for adding an additional farmer. It obviously costs something to develop the systems in the first place and to test them and refine them and keep them current. So because of that, it's important to operate these at scale. They'll be most efficient if they're done at quite large scale. And that, I think, means there's a very natural role for governments to play here, at least for things for smallholder farmers. I think in general, something about if you think about agricultural extension, traditional agricultural extension with humans, that's typically provided by the government for free to farmers. And I think digital messages should similarly be provided for free to farmers, and that requires typically some role for the state. Okay, let me turn to another example where I think we're seeing a confluence of both technological change and dissemination of information, but also technological change in weather forecasting. So, as we all know, with climate change is coming not just changes in climate, but increased variability and reduced predictability of weather and of seasons. And that obviously makes life much more difficult for farmers. Now, the good news is it's now possible to make vastly more accurate and timely weather forecasts, and in part using artificial intelligence techniques for predicting weather. There's really been huge advances there. And similarly, there's evidence that farmers change their agricultural practices when they get this. So, for example, in Colombia, when weather information was disseminated along with price information, that led to a gain for farmers of between $40 and $140 per farmer. That was, although I should say that wasn't very precisely estimated, but that was the estimate. We're currently in discussions with the Inter-American Development Bank, which is very interested in providing both better soil health information, soil chemistry information, and AI-based weather forecasts through digital agricultural systems in Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Peru. And if this is something that would be appealing beyond those countries, happy to talk afterwards. So those are examples of some areas where there's evidence of impact from these messages. But let me say that it's very important to have farmer feedback and have feedback loops to make these things work effectively and to actually do digital, to do A/B testing and incorporate human-centered design. So let me give an example. This will be an example from India, not from the region, but the government of India has a program to test local soil quality and then to deliver soil health cards to farmers that explain what nutrients are missing from their soil and what they need. Now, that in principle is very helpful because if the farmer knows what nutrients are missing, then they can use the appropriate nutrients without using too much fertilizer, which could have negative consequences for climate change and for the local environment. So the government, in many cases, many parts of India, committed to test all the smallholder plots and distribute these soil health cards to provide the information. But the designs that the government came up with initially, I'm not showing slides here, but it was a very complicated design, full of tables of numbers, very hard to understand. The farmers the units were not necessarily ones farmers were familiar with, and a very small percentage of farmers could actually understand and use this information. There are also problems with trust. One study found that 70% of farmers didn't trust the soil health cards. So what was needed was there was a collaboration where the government was involved, researchers were involved, and human-centered design principles were involved. And critically, there are discussions with farmers through focus groups, through formal surveys, and eventually through A/B tests. And a redesigned soil health card was developed, which is much easier for farmers to understand and they found much more useful. It also turned out that complementing the physical soil health card with was tried various techniques, complementing that with an agronomist who could explain it, complementing that with a video message, an audio message. Okay, not surprisingly, having a live in-person agronomist was best, but that's very, very expensive. But what was almost as good was just having a simple audio message. So having the audio message increased comprehension from 6% up to 37%. So, still not what would be ideal, but a huge improvement over the basics. So I think that is an example of what's something that's very important to accompany any digital effort, which is effort to seek farmer feedback and incorporate that in the design, and to try different approaches, try different designs. And there's, now, I've been talking so far about fairly basic systems, but I think there are other things that can be done. So for example, connecting farmers with extension workers, so that the extension workers are part of the system as well, and they can respond to local needs, or farmers can ask questions to extension workers. There's also linking farmers with supply chains, both on the input side and on the output side. And then linking farmers with each other or with cooperatives or contract farming operations. So for example, I was involved in a study in Kenya with a sugarcane factory. The sugarcane factory was responsible for delivering fertilizer to the farmers. And then they deducted the cost of that when it was time to pay the farmers for their sugarcane. The problem was the fertilizer was often late, and sometimes it wasn't delivered at all. And that caused a loss for the farmers. Now, theoretically, the farmers could complain to the sugar factory about this, but in practice, it was very hard for them to do this. The sugarcane company eventually set up a hotline so the farmers could call in, and they could reach immediately. The reports would go to the senior management, and that dramatically cut late delivery of fertilizer or non-delivery of fertilizer. We recently started working with Mexico's Public Rural Development Bank, FIRA, to try to design rigorous evaluations of digital agriculture services. And they're doing some very interesting things. They're using satellite data to monitor producers' input use and forecast yields, but they've set up a peer-to-peer platform in which they get farmers to make videos and help them make videos, and then those videos can be shared with other farmers. And some of those videos by farmers attract 100,000 weekly views. So farmer-to-farmer communication can be a very powerful tool, and trying to help farmers put those things together and find ways to optimize those, I think can be very powerful. So those are just a few examples of the types of things that are going on in digital agriculture. Some evidence of impact. We'd be very happy to talk to governments or other organizations about this, and including about evaluation, which would be my technical specialty. In general, we're very happy to collaborate further with people on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kremer. I know you have to go, and so we'll let you move. But before you leave, I think yesterday was your birthday. So let's say happy birthday to Dr. Kremer, please, everyone. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I'll take that microphone from you.
Wonderful.
I'll give that to the minister from Brazil, and I'll let you move down. Thank you, Dr. Kremer.
Thank you.
I'll come here. Oh, you can't hear, okay. I think you can hear me. So now we're honored and we're very grateful that the Minister of Agricultural Development and Family Farming from Brazil is here. He's going to speak in Portuguese, and so Fernando Francisco Fujita Melo is going to translate for us. Well, I'll let you guys sort out how you want to do that. But thank you. We're honored to have you here. Brazil's a huge country with huge farms. You're responsible for the small farmers, and there's millions of small farmers. Can you talk a little bit about resilience, how you're helping the small farmers with resilience, and how you can help them with financing as well in order to combat climate change? The floor is yours, Minister.
Well, good morning, everybody. I thank very much ICA for invitation to be here with you. Thank you, Manuel Otero, ICA's director. And in Brazil, we have two ministers for agriculture. The big agriculture, it's one minister, and another minister for small agriculture, family agriculture, and agrarian reform that I am the minister of President Lula. I was hearing Mr. Michel Kramer, and many of things he talk about we are implementing in Brazil in terms of extension, in terms of linking the small agriculture to university, and where we have technology centers. In Brazil, we have a very important enterprise in technology for agriculture, which calls Embrapa. Embrapa is a very strong enterprise, so we're linking the Embrapa with small agriculture. We are linking universities with the small agriculture. We are linking also the private sector with small agriculture to help the agriculture to make the transition to in this climate crisis we're living in Brazil also. But I want to talk to you about financing. We have a brand new experience in Brazil, a brand new experience in financing agriculture. We finance agriculture many years, the big agriculture and the small agriculture. And we have a very small interest for the family agriculture. But we are changing the financing in many ways. First ways is how you finance the small agriculture to produce food. Second, how can we finance agriculture for forest, recovering forest? Third, how can we finance agriculture for agroecological practices? So we have the brand new results, and I will bring to you those results. So last year to this year, we decrease the interests to produce food because this financing was going to soy and not to produce rice and beans and vegetables, fruits. So we decrease the interest to produce food. Second, we decrease the interest 1 point more to produce agroecological production. And third, we diminish the interest to forests. And the results are 30% of increasing of agroecological, organic and agroecological agriculture, 30% is increasing in Brazil in the small agriculture. We increased 20% in machineries. We increased 176% in beans, 53% in onions, 24% in potato, and we increased 53% in bioeconomy, in forests 40% in forest. So what happened? Firstly, we decreased the interests for those lines, no food, agroecological, forest. Second, we call the banks and say, "Oh, please ask the people when they give the money, try to change the culture, not cow, not soy, but food, forest." And so the results are very fresh in terms of changing what we are financing for small agriculture, family agriculture. I don't know if you could understand my English. Yes. But I'm trying to say directly in English because it's the brand new experience we have in Brazil for the last year to this year, and these results are very, very fresh that I am presenting for you here. So changing the way you are financing the agriculture and giving support in terms of supporting extension for the farmers, small farmers in Brazil. That's all. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. I don't think you could hear me. Muito obrigado. Thank you, Minister. It's so important to hear from Brazil, and thank you for being here to represent the government of Brazil. Here at this COP, often Brazil is the target of a lot of attacks for a number of different reasons. And it's important to have someone like you here to explain the truth about what's happening in Brazil and the positive aspects of issues like that.
I want to say that from last year to this year, we could diminish deforestation in Brazil in 53% in deforestation this year. So we have a good results to present in this copy in terms of diminishing deforestation in our country also.
Well, thank you so much. The Director General coined a phrase as part of our being at these COPs is agriculture is part of the solution to climate change. We're reducing emissions in agriculture, and so it's great to have a representative from the government of Brazil with us today. I'd like to now turn it over to Luiz Volpe to talk about actions on the ground. You represent the World Farmers Organization, a very important organization. Can you tell us about what you're doing from your organization standpoint on resilience, on financing, and helping small farmers?
Thank you very much. You hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, first and foremost, Lloyd, for the question and for inviting us. In a nutshell, the World Farmers Organization is an international organization established by the farmers. Our members are national farmers organizations, currently 81 from 55 countries around the world. So we represent the full spectrum of agriculture, also in geographical terms. And we are here as part of the farmers constituency. I see some of my mates in the room, and I'm very happy about it. We are here to bring the perspective and the voice of farmers in the negotiations, but also in partners events or potential partners events. And AICA is one of our main partners, and I really want to thank Mr. Otero and Mr. Lloyd for this partnership and support that they are giving to the farmers, always putting the farmers on the spotlight. We have organized, lately we have organized another event in Rome, where we also showed that multi-stakeholder partnerships like this are probably the way to success if we want to really encourage food systems transformation to address climate change. Food systems is systems, and for the same words, it's a systematic environment where many systems actually interact together. And for this nature, the farmers are in constant cooperation, contact with other actors in the value chain, with private and public institutions, with international organizations. And these are all the partners that farmers are really looking for to increase their capacity to contribute to the fight of climate change. There are a number of interventions that are currently being done, and these are actually related to the policy environment, because it's important for the farmers to have political stability, but also visibility in the political approach at country level. Farmers are entrepreneurs. Actually, also differentiating farmers and private sector is not correct. Farmers are part of the private sector. They are entrepreneurs, with a huge difference between farmers and company. That is, that companies may release, if you allow me this word, may release the business risks to investors. Farmers take it on their own shoulders and the shoulders of their own families. And this is the social component of the farming sector. But still, farmers remain private sector actors that want to grow in their business, want to increase their profitability and income, to also provide an opportunity to their families to grow and the communities to grow and to contribute to the life of the countries. So what is the farmers organization doing? As a WFO, we are trying to collaborate with national governments, but also with international organizations to bring to farmers training, capacity building, knowledge to strengthen their advocacy role at national level, to collaborate with the governments. One of the things that we are doing is, for example, making sure that much more farmers organizations contribute to the revision of the NDCs. Much more and much better than it was on the previous rounds, when only the 15% of NDCs were designed in collaboration with farmers' organizations. We are really hoping that this data will improve at the next round, so we are working together with our national members to make them more capable to work with the governments. Capacity of farmers' organization is a key point. Also, for example, if we want to speak about extension services and training to the farmers, access to knowledge from the farmers, everything has to go through the farmers' organizations that are in a way able to translate what we discuss here or in other fora into the farmers' language. Farmers are not into discussions like these. Farmers don't even know what we are talking about. They don't know about definition. They are just those who wake up very early in the morning and go to their own fields and make their own activities to have the business growing. This is what farmers do every day, and if we want them to be part of the solution, we need to allow them and we need to put them into the conditions to do it. For example, another key point is farmers need to increase sustainability levels at farm gates, and they are also ready to do it. But most of the cases, they don't find, for example, local financial institutions that can support them in borrowing the money that is needed to make investments at farm gate. So how do we improve that part? As WFO, we are trying to talk with the international institutions and national institutions or private bank to see, to explore innovative channels to drain finance directly to the farmers. And this is another key point if we really want to achieve some results. And then there's a matter of training and knowledge to be brought to the farmers, so we cooperate with international organizations, like I was mentioning AITA and many others, but also with the science sector. We need to close the gap between science and farmers. Listening to the farmers is not an option. Listening to the farmers is the only way we have to take to the farmers those solutions and tools that they need to increase their capacity to contribute to the fight to climate change. And actually, I would like to thank all of those who present programs and initiatives in which the collaboration and the dialogue with the farmer is promoted as if it was such an innovative way to go. But for us, that is the basics, actually. If we don't listen to the farmers first, we cannot pretend to bring tools to the farmers and then that they have to implement it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luisa. I think everyone who knows ICA knows why we're obviously an ally of the World Farmers Organization. One of the phrases, one of the principles of the Director General's premises when we were talking about food system summits is exactly that farmers need to be a part of these discussions. I look out and see my friend A.G. Kawamura, who is a farmer from California that I've known for many years. And it's so important that farmers are a part of that discussion and that they contribute to these types of discussions. And that is why we have this Home of Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas, so that we have a place for farmers to voice their opinions, to be recognized. And as Norman Borlaug said, take it to the farmer and you'll get your answers. So with that, I'd like to move on to Imelda Bakundo and talk about Asia. Talk about the link between NDCs and some examples of what you're doing in Asia to help farmer resilience from your perspective. And thank you for joining us, Imelda.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. This topic is very close to my heart, farmer voices. Before I joined FAO this year, I was working with the COP29 presidency in forming their food system programs as a senior advisor. And one of my experience there is to really push farmer on the stage at the presidency event. And I think it's one of the very first time that the farmers were being given the presidency stage. So I'm doing this again this year. And Mr. Senor Otero opened the session today with a question. How many farmers are here in the room? Right? And we know the answer to that. It's not as many as we would want. And I would like to pose another question, which is similar to what Luisa has already mentioned. How many of us know of farmers' work and contributions actually being accounted in the NDCs, in the nationally determined contribution? How many of the farmers' voices are actually recorded, or how many of the farmers are actually consulted in the NDCs? one of the good news is that FAO did an analysis of seeing how the agri-food system is being featured in the NDCs all over the world. And we could see that there are increasing efforts to include and see the contributions of the agri-food system in the NDCs. And this is significant because you may be aware that we are relying largely on transport and energy and the forestry sector beforehand as big contributors to the NDCs. And it's only now, with the continuing efforts, and we could see it translated with COP presidencies from COP26, 27, 28, 29, and we have such high hopes for the COP presidency of Brazil, that the continuing legacy of agriculture will be featured more, because we are seeing more that we cannot just rely on carbon storage to meet in forests to meet the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. So more and more we need to look at how we are really engaging with farmers so that what they want are reflected in the NDCs. And in the Asia Pacific, it's becoming more and more really being seen. More of the approaches, for example, on alternate wetting and drying, reduction of methane in rice production, low emissions livestock is being seen with support from New Zealand and Australia, for example. We're really looking at how we could lower methane from livestock. And I think that there's an openness from farmers here once there's more information understood, and once some of the pilots, for example in Vietnam, are going to be scaled up. So we have high hopes in this. The Asia Pacific region is one of the area of the world that we have been seeing such extreme weather event. Right now, there are like 3 hurricanes circling around the Philippines. Taiwan often blames the Philippines for all these because then they inherit this from Philippines to Taiwan onto Vietnam. So these are really showing extreme devastation to farmers. One of the hurricane that came 2 weeks ago came at the time that the farmers were about to harvest rice. And so it's devastating to these farmers. And at the same time, we wanted farmers to contribute to climate action, right? So this is really, really extremely important that we see the reality of this and that the NDCs are cognizant of this. And this, we go towards financing. The issue of financing is huge here. We're saying that, okay, all this climate action will happen underground. This means that we're going to have to work with farmers to see their contributions into the NDCs. And the transformation, all these approaches, some of the technologies that Dr. Kremer shared earlier needs to be funded at a scaled up level. But last year, the farmers went to the presidency stage at COP28 to say, we are understanding that there's so much climate finance available from the Green Climate Fund, from the adaptation, from the World Bank, but we don't feel it. This is what farmers are saying on the stage, and they carry this message all the way to here and onwards to COP30. They want to be a part of this whole climate finance negotiations, not just on NDCs, not just on policy negotiations, but also on accessing this finance available at the national level, but they feel that they hardly feel it. So to support these technologies that Dr. Kremer has shared with us, this financing needs to be felt at the ground level. And this is where initiatives like FAST, the Food Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation, a project, a legacy of the Egyptian presidency, is looking at. It's looking at how do we open more climate finance, increase climate finance, because climate finance for the sector, for agriculture, is only 4% of the total climate finance available. This needs to increase. And so this year as well, the COP29 presidency decided that they're going to launch an initiative called Harmoniya Climate Initiative for farmers as a pet project of the FAST initiative, to really show and give attention to the call of farmers for them to bring this climate finance to the ground level. So these are initiatives that we hope can support this gap that's out there between availability of climate finance and the farmers' needs for it. And lastly, I wanted to take up on what Dr. Kramer has mentioned on farmer feedback loop. I know he's mentioning this in regards to technology and innovation, but I wanted to show this, that we need this farmer feedback loop in terms of creating collaboration in policies and in finance, not just in technology, because we needed to address this issue of so many of our initiatives are everywhere, right? There's even some duplication of our initiatives. What no one is funding at the moment is collaboration as a full-time work, cross-sectoral coordination as a full-time work. And so we need this farmer feedback loop in order to collaborate with so many initiatives out there ongoing. And this is a full-time work. And I hope that many of us can echo this, magnify, that funders need to actually fund this collaborative essence of bringing farmers' voices into climate action. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melda. You know, you talk about the hurricanes circling the Philippines. Just in the last week, we've had some torrential rains in Central America where many of us live, and the impacts on agriculture have been tremendous, not just on agriculture, but on just people's lives in general. Minister Mai, you talked very passionately in your closing comments in the last panel. Here you are again. You're working hard, and we thank you for that. And I think it's really important to get a perspective from a smaller country like Belize in Central America, in the Caribbean, and how are the policies that you're looking at and the global dialogue that you're hearing here, how is that touching the lives of a Minister of Agriculture in Belize? And even more important than that, how does that get down to the farmers in Belize? Because we talk about a lot of finance and a lot of schemes, but it never gets to the farmer. What are you doing in Belize to help them and help them achieve financing?
Well, first and foremost, let us consider the most important aspects that could accelerate climate financing. And the speaker before we mentioned something very important: how much of the finance gets down to the farmer? Does the farmer feel the love? It's time for the farmer to feel the love. One of the most important aspects, in my view, is the aspect of losses and damage. That's where the love will come from. We consider losses to farmers by climate change in two areas. One is a direct loss, and the second is an indirect loss. The direct being losses due to floods, to droughts, to varied rainfall patterns. The example she used in rice. The farmer invested his livelihood in the best seed, high genetic material, high yields. He planted, he fertilized, he cultivated, and it's time to harvest. And there should be no rainfall when you're harvesting, because the farmers are the smartest people on earth. They know when to plant. But we are unable to predict the weather. And here comes the rainfall, and the best crop is lost. And so all the farmers' investment is gone. If the rainfall would have come when he had just planted, the losses would have been less. But investing everything and at the end you lose it is a terrible loss. Direct losses to farmers. Indirect losses to farmers in both animal and plant. Again, we've seen high temperatures spikes when the corn is flowering. When there's pollination, and the effects of reduced yield when temperatures are high during pollination are clearly seen. Spikes, heat waves of 3 degrees more, you will have a lower yield in corn. That's an indirect loss. I got a call from my colleague in Guatemala who said to me, Minister, please, do you have someone with experience in combating Asian bean trip? We are taking significant losses because of Asian bean trip in beans in Guatemala. We had it 2 years ago for the first time. We didn't have anything to control it with. We learned. Luckily, the bean was already in a mature stage when we got infested with Asian bean trip, Megalorotrops ocellatus, a new pest to the region. How it got here, God knows. But Guatemala is suffering right now by that infestation. We have seen how screwworms have moved. 30 years ago, it was eradicated completely from the Americas. I was a young lad then, 19 years old, working as a technician, eradicating screwworms from the US, Mexico, Belize, Central America, all the way to Panama. And we've clearly seen how high temperatures shorten the life cycle of this pest. And at this point, it is in Guatemala. Belize and El Salvador are the only 2 countries that are free of screwworms. And clearly, if I'm an importing country and you have screwworm, I would definitely redo the protocols for exporting to my country. We've seen frog hopper, anomalia in sugarcane, like we've never seen before, combined with stem borer, and now fusarium, which has never been a pathogen in sugarcane in the region. Of the 75,000 acres of sugarcane in Belize, 40,000 acres are infected right now with different levels of severity. We estimate losses to be $30, $35 million maybe. And as the months progress, the mildly affected will be severely affected. And there is no single treatment or a magic bullet that will fix this problem. It's an integrated system. It has to be a program of controlling this disease. And by the time we are ready to put all integrated systems into place, we would have lost half of the industry. There are 5,453 sugarcane farmers and families that will be affected. They didn't cause climate change. They didn't cause the droughts. And so now we have to look around to find resources to develop a program, not a control, a program to restructure, to rehabilitate the sugar industry. During the heat waves, we had the longest dry this year. Belize has a number of sources of energy. Hydro, cogeneration from sugarcane, and the greater part is purchased from Mexico, from fossil fuel. But the spikes in temperature, the demand for energy, Mexico could not supply its own country, and therefore hundreds of outages, leading to high temperature rises in the barns where poultry is raised, high mortality in poultry, and so the farmers had to invest in generators, but again, it's fossil fuels. From a policy decision, the government had to decide to remove the import taxes on renewable energy sources, solar panels, to provide energy for the poultry producers so that the mortality rates would go down. So you're right. You are right that the farmers are suffering losses, and we are asked to help mitigate the effects of climate change, but there's no love. There's no resources. And those are the harsh challenges that the farmers in our countries are facing today. And so I say again, what will we achieve today? What do we go back with to our farmers?
Thank you so much, Minister. I think it's really important to have government ministers from Belize, from Brazil, here to talk about the realities in the context of this meeting with all these people running around and talking about climate change and often blaming agriculture and blaming farmers for that. They need to understand the reality of what it takes to produce the food that they eat. And so having your voice here to moderate that, as well as to talk about how farmers are actually part of the solution, is so important. So we're very grateful. Moving from Belize, not too far away, to the Caribbean, to St. Lucia, we have our Ambassador of Goodwill, Caitlin Carew. And Caitlin, can you maybe talk about what's going on in the Caribbean, another region that's very vulnerable to climate shocks, and what farmers are doing in their policy development on climate change issues in your region? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here and to represent the diverse voices of farmers, especially farmers within the Caribbean region. And of course, as usual, I want to thank ICA for having me here as well. My organization, Helen's Daughters, while it's based in the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, it also is spreading across the Caribbean to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, and other islands in the Eastern Caribbean. And really and truly, we treat farmers, some persons have mentioned farmers as entrepreneurs, which is true. Some persons have mentioned farmers as natural scientists. All of that is true, but we treat farmers as holistic individuals, not just as worker bodies, not just as entrepreneurs, but trying to build them holistically as leaders of sustainable development. In my region in particular, we found that farmers are usually community leaders. They're not just in charge of food security, but they're also, aside from that, very much involved in informal decision making, but very much at the forefront of a lot of decisions within our country and within our region. But really and truly, when it comes to adaptation and mitigation at Helen's Daughters, there have been a few strategies that we've taken and that are key. First and foremost, adaptation. We've already accepted that the negative impacts of climate change are not going to be reversed overnight. So essentially, we've been spending a concerted effort in ensuring that our farmers are adapting to the ever-changing climate, and that can be in a number of ways, from identifying climate-adaptable seed varieties, which are now available in our islands, water conservation, for example, when in times of drought, which has become more and more frequent, and even using indigenous methods of reducing soil erosion, for example, planting vetiver during floods, for example. The second is sustainability. As an organization, we do not believe in one-off projects, which is what you tend to find in the Caribbean when it comes to agriculture. Not sure other regions, but just speaking of my own. And what we've essentially believed in is that if we start a program, it's not just for 1 year or for 6 months, but something that can be sustainable and can last a length of time. And finally, one of the things that I think before starting Helen's Daughters, I never really realized that we needed to invest in, that was in recovery and resilience. A number of agricultural organizations in particular, we focus on whether it's integrating technology, whether it's in building capacity for farmers. But the minute, for example, a climate-related disaster strikes, everything has ended. And what we've realized as organizations within the agricultural sector is that we actually have to put in investment for recovery and resilience, particularly in small island developing states that are obviously very susceptible to climate-related disasters. Just to give an example, because again, Helen's Daughters is supposed to be a case study for this panel, so I wanted to really root it in the examples that we've experienced. So for example, in 2022, there was a November 6, 2022, there was a drought in the northern part of St. Lucia. 90 minutes of rain resulted in about $7 million in damages. 90 minutes of rain. And we realized that we started using 3% of our already restricted budget in terms of recovery and resilience. Then the very next year, there was Tropical Storm Brett. And again, we used about 7% of our restricted budget for recovery and resilience. Thankfully, we realized again that we cannot just be sitting back and waiting for the next disaster and not be prepared. So we had invested not only in strategies to upskill our staff, but also our farmers in disaster management, in household plannings for disasters and so forth, and also partnering with organizations like Care International. We were actually able to provide care and cash and vouchers assistance after Hurricane Beryl. So we see that 3% in 22, then it rose to 7%, and in 2024 we actually used about 15% of our budget for recovery and resilience. And it just goes to show that each year we brace ourselves for another hurricane season or even a drought, knowing full well that another disaster can disrupt our livelihoods, food security, and well-being. Climate impacts continue to intensify, placing additional strain on our already strained resources. Now, I've touched on the challenges, but I want to at least start with some hope, with the successes. In terms of our success in adaptation and mitigation, I think one of the main things that's really lacking in the agricultural sector is a community-centered approach. It's really heartwarming to hear some of the ministers and negotiators and other large international organizations wanting to bring and integrate farmers into the conversation. And I think that is a step for sure, but I think that, again, it shouldn't just be a talk shop. We need to add some actions to this as well. Aside from bringing them into convenings like COP, for example, we need to also have them in decision making. We need to have more localized policy decision making when it comes to, well, I'll speak for the Caribbean region. And I think that our success so far has come into tailoring climate-resilient agricultural practices accordingly, listening to the needs of our beneficiaries, bringing them in and actually co-creating solutions tailored to our farmers. The second, I would say, a key success has been strategic partnerships and support. So, for example, we do have homegrown capacity development programs such as our Ag Academy and so forth, but what we have done is utilize organizations like ICA that have a breadth of information and resources in terms of capacity development. So sharing that information and ensuring that our farmers are able to be a part of these types of training resources and so forth. Another key partner, for example, Care International. We recognize that our strength is not in disaster preparedness, but there are organizations that we can partner with, whether it's Care, whether it's Caritas, that can upskill us to be better prepared and also to have access to more flexible funding to respond to disasters as well. And then I think finally, looking at different types of funding. When I first started Helen's Daughters, most of the funders in the region were very project-based, which again, it lacks sustainability and it lacks a sense of innovation as well. And what we've noticed in the 7 years that we've existed is that we've been able to partner with philanthropists, with funders that are focused on long-term flexible funding. For example, the Clara Lionel Foundation, the Open Society Foundation. So there's this new change in mindsets in terms of not giving charity, but providing philanthropy. And I think finally also in trying to partner with governments and utilizing partnerships like ICA to lobby for small organizations and small NGOs like ourselves. One instance was, for example, at our a few weeks ago, there was a Caribbean Week of Agriculture in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we were invited to a closed session with ministers of agriculture. And one of the, I think for the first time ever, one of the conversations that came in, because after Hurricane Beryl, we realized that we're focusing a lot on infrastructural damages and those losses. But can you place a number on a life lost or a number on the mental health support that a farmer and that farmer's family requires? So, for example, we've set up a psychosocial support helpline. And a number of ministers were receptive to that. And for the first time, I think you found ministers of agriculture talking about trauma and PTSD that exists within the agricultural sector, because constantly farmers have to bounce back, have to constantly be resilient, but to what cost? Another success, for example, is our advocacy and visibility. About 60% of our organization, all of them are women, but about 60% are under the age of 40. So we have a relatively young demographic in terms of Helen's Daughters, and we leverage social media as best as we can. So, for example, you no longer see a disempowered profile of a farmer from the Caribbean. You see more so women that are proud to be within the sector, and women that are really pioneering a number of things in agriculture in the Caribbean. And also, aside from social media, with thanks to ICA, we are excited to also launch our documentary focusing on Caribbean women in agriculture at COP29 as well. So that was the good. Now I'll mention some of the challenges in particular in implementation. A number of my co-panelists have talked about funding. It was really interesting to hear Brazil's case, especially in terms of behavioral change, when speaking about the financial institutions and so forth. And I think for us, finance has been the biggest issue. And it's a two-pronged approach. One, again, trying to constantly focus on attracting more philanthropists into the region. Also, attracting more private sectors to set up. I mean, I hate to say it, but for example, with Helen's Daughters, 98% of our funding comes from outside of the Caribbean region. When it comes to the private sector, there is still a mindset of providing charity, a one-off sum, rather than philanthropy or long-term partnerships. The second is essentially designing access to flexible, large-scale financing for adaptation and so forth. I'm really glad to hear, things like GCF and the World Bank and so forth, all those funds. But, for example, there was one World Bank scheme that was supposed to help barriers in terms of access to collateral, to access financing. However, the local bank had actually added 1% per annum as their administrative fee without the World Bank knowing. So again, I think it's about trying to keep on top of and being watchdogs for certain international agencies, what's going on locally as well. Another example is that, again, we have thankfully some good relationships with philanthropists. So we try to raise capital and essentially funnel that capital through a partnership with a local bank. So we're taking all of the risk of raising that funding, and yet still not one bank has bit into partnering for that partnership. However, they are interested in providing a sum to do some one-off community projects, but not a long-term low-interest loan program, for example, for farmers. And I think there's two more that I will touch on. One of them is policy barriers and land access. I'll touch on the land access in particular, because I think right now at COP and in general, our governments are generally talking about access to land and supporting youth and minority groups and so forth. But from our standpoint, as an organization that does not rely on government, we have been waiting for almost 3 years to get land for our farmers. There's a lack of land banks in our region, although you see in a lot of our national adaptation plans and so forth the existence of these policy frameworks. So it's about connecting policy to the actual what's going on the ground. And like the minister rightly said, obviously there's a huge disconnect. And finally, I think the fragmented ecosystem for recovery. As I mentioned before, when it comes to agriculture, I think we just think of the final outcome, which is, okay, a farmer producing this much crop, if I invest in technology, if I invest in capacity development. But we need to, at this point, accept that climate change, the impacts of climate change, and we need to accept that we need to have some forms of flexible funding flows to support farmers in the recovery process, and not only in the infrastructural damages and so forth, but also going past that to their mental health and well-being as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Caitlin. That was awesome. I see the Director General moving. I don't know if he's moving for water, but Director General, I thought Caitlin's remarks and really the remarks of everyone on this panel was a pretty good commercial for the launching of the Resilience Fund, which is at 4:30 tomorrow, correct? So issues of having the funds to be able to react in the Americas without having to wait for the world is something that we're going to discuss tomorrow at 4:30. We encourage all of you to come. And if you have people with money, I encourage them to come as well, because, you know, there's a lot of funds out there. There's trillions of dollars that people are talking about, and they usually go to the same pockets, and it doesn't get to the farmers, and it doesn't help the Caribbean respond to hurricanes. It doesn't help us fight the diseases that the ministers have talked about. So we need to find ways that are more flexible in terms of financing to get funds immediately to farmers and to governments in order to assist their farmers when that happens. We have a few seconds left, really, maybe 5 minutes. 7 minutes. So if I could ask each of you, starting with Minister Tejeda on down, to just give a final 1 minute summary, final point, maybe something you forgot to talk about, just in 1 minute, and then we'll just move on down the line here to sum up. Minister Tejeda.
So I want to talk. I want to thank very much for invitation to be here, and I think agriculture, it's a very important part of solution in terms of climate crisis. So we have to have the farmers to talk about how to make regenerative agriculture, and how the agriculture can contribute to diminish the climate disaster. So I think our role is to put the farmers in the center of this discussion. And we want to welcome everybody for the COP30 in Brazil. In the COP30, we want to show a very big change with Lula government, and also to try to advance in terms of compromises in the world to avoid this climate disaster. So thank you very much for ICA. Thank you, everybody here.
Obrigado, Minister. Everyone is talking about Belém. As we were working for Baku, the excitement about Belém is coming, so I hope you guys are ready because everyone wants to be there. Imelda.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to remind us that the global climate action the global climate pledges doesn't happen really globally, but at the regional scale. Right? So it's the region who really contribute to these global climate goals. And I wanted to emphasize that I think we should move towards learning from each other, from the regions. I was just given a proposal, and I think it's going to be funded very soon, of a knowledge exchange between the Asia, the ASEAN region, and the Latin America region with ICA and PLACA and the Association of Southeast Asian Nation Climate Resilience Network, of which I'm very much involved. So I think we need to promote more of these interchanges because our farmers face the same realities, the same challenges. There's uniqueness in context, of course, but the same challenges. And of course, we need to look at how can we do the support together and the answer together. And so let's please work on interregional exchanges more. I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you, Milda. That's great news. I think there's a lot of similarities when we talk about tropical agriculture, particularly from ASEAN and the Americas. So thank you very much. Minister Mai.
Thank you very much. As we conclude the discussions of this session, I want to remind everyone here that while we are sitting here, there are farmers in our region who are wondering how they will pay their mortgage. There are farmers and their families at this moment scraping up what was left of their crop. There are farmers who plan to visit the financing institutions to seek refinancing to produce food for their people and for other people. Because in the Americas, we produce food for ourselves and for others. So it's important today that we do some in-depth analysis of what we're going to offer our farmers. These farmers that today are facing serious challenges, they and their families. And I wish and I hope that there is something good will come out of these forums.
Thank you, Minister. Your voice is so important because so many people here think that food comes from their fancy supermarket or their fancy restaurant, and it starts in a farm, and those farmers face huge challenges and a lack of financing in order to just survive. Thank you very much. Caitlin.
For me in particular, I think that we need to increase the diverse voices that are represented, particularly at COP. Again, I think ICA has been making a concerted effort for that, but I think that even things like, for example, scaling climate education and training initiatives is important. Even trying to include, for example, persons with farmers' backgrounds into the negotiations as well, so that you have those types of diverse perspectives. Another, of course, is I think similar perhaps taking that approach that Brazil has taken in influencing behavioral change when it comes to financing institutions and financing agriculture. And finally, well, again, close to heart, but inclusive and localized policy formation, whether it comes to access to finance or whether it comes to access to land as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. You're holding up well. I know you just got in yesterday, long trip. You were on the same flight with me and AG. You're doing great. Louisa, you didn't have to fly as far.
Actually, I have more questions than answers in this. While, I mean, the more I listen to people and I participate in discussions, questions arise. So I would like to share one that is really coming up in my mind every day while I'm here, which is, if science says that food systems is responsible for an average of 30% on climate change, then why only 4% of climate finance is drained to the sector. And maybe, Lloyd, we can organize another event to try to give an answer to this question, which remains unanswered for me.
That's a
And now, just to close, I mean, probably we should also look at ourselves and check at the mirror if we are taking proper responsibilities for what we are doing in our own roles. And for sure, the farmers have a key role to play, but it is also sure that there are other roles that should be played a little bit more efficiently. And I also have another question, if you allow me, which is livestock sector. Livestock sector, we all know that must be improved in terms of sustainability. But then the question is, why, if we have to work more on livestock sector sustainability, are we investing so much in alternative protein production? And on this, I'm not commenting, just giving the floor back to you, Lloyd. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Louisa. I could comment on that for a long time, but I won't. We just came back from a sustainable livestock conference in Uruguay last week. Minister Favreau was there. Livestock is improving its emissions and its sequestration. It's doing a great job, and so there's really good stories to tell about agriculture. But your question is very important. Why is all the money going to the other areas and people are blaming us? And that's why we're here. That's why we're here, to have a voice, to have a safe place for agriculture, and to talk about agriculture as part of the solution to climate change, and to have farmers and representatives of farmers and ministers of agriculture as part of this discussion, not on the sidelines like we were years ago. So I hope you would all join me in thanking this great panel with a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Grazie.